It's wonderful to have you with us today. My name is Danilo Acquisto. I'm the CEO and co-founder of a digital marketing agency called Special Effects Media, and we help partner with Ornico and the IAB to bring you these insight series on a monthly basis. Focusing on trust and transparency, and how funny, at least I'm transparent about how the fact that the internet on the one side was giving us a bit of hell. But let's hope that that is not an omen for the remainder of our webinar here today, and hope everybody is at least starting to survive the crazy Q4. Lots of times everybody is pretty burnt out at this stage. The media industry is in planning for the various different big holiday seasons, Black Fridays, or that is probably a sinful word, not allowed to mention it, lots of launches and 2026 planning. So there's a lot of sort of energy required from you cognitively. And so we're really grateful that you've made some time with us today to kind of continue the learning journey. And hopefully by the end of the discussion, you leave feeling a little bit more at least safe and transparent and trusted in terms of your plans for the new year. We've got three incredible speakers lined up for today, and I'm super excited about all of them. They are just absolute titans in our industry from the past, present, and looking towards the future as well. And for years, media planning and buying was often described as a bit of a black box, full of mystery, insider deals, and not much daylight. But the world has indeed changed. Brands, agencies, as well as audiences, you and I as consumers, now demand quite a lot more openness and accountability than ever before. And so today we'll be unpacking the past, present, and the future of that transformation and what it means for you in your businesses today. Our speakers, first up, is going to be focusing on the past. The focus is on the era of closed-door deals. We'll hear from Gordon Muller. He's a true industry veteran with over 45 years in advertising. He's held senior roles at McCann Erickson, Bates, Ogilvy, OMD. He's the chair of the AMF, or was at least, as well as the AMASA. And he's quite literally written the book on media strategy in South Africa that students all learn from at university. We're then going to look at the present with the push for disclosure from Troy Griffin. He's the marketing lead at the Core Group. Troy's a sharp strategist and creative storyteller who's all about honesty in advertising, helping brands connect through authenticity and not through algorithms. And then lastly, we take a look at what the future is going to hold for us with Chris Buerta, the Group MD of Park Advertising. They are the powerhouse behind the Media Shop and Meta Media. Chris has led groundbreaking growth across digital and integrated media and continues to challenge the industry to think differently. And that's exactly what he's going to try and do for us today as part of the Insight series. So I'm very much looking forward to staying engaged with you. So we do obviously have a live Q&A. You see at the bottom of your screen on the Zoom webinar, there's a little button that says Q&A. In there, you can either type your answer with your name or anonymously. There's a little button to select anonymous, but it's a webinar transparency, so put your name. And then you can obviously ask any questions to our speakers that are coming up today and get them to answer those in a good panel discussion. Obviously, these sessions are recorded and will be distributed as well too. The slides, unfortunately, won't be. Those do need to remain sort of confidential in the way that they are delivered. But yes, the presentations will be available as well to post the session to be able to share with any of your executives or others in your businesses and teams beyond the session itself. I think it's time to get started. We've got quite a meaty group of speakers to get through today. And I'd like to get through all the content without feeling like we're rushing through it all. So let's get started with our first speaker. His name is Gordon Muller. He is an absolute titan in our industry, as you know, and he takes us all the way back to the beginning and focusing on the era of closed door deals. Gordon Muller is the head coach at the Media Coach. He's got more than 45 years in advertising. He's obviously held really senior roles at McCann Erickson, Ogilvy, Saatchi, OMD, and he's the former chair of the AMF and AMASA, and the author of several key media textbooks that still get used in universities today. And so, Gordon, it's wonderful to have you with us this morning. How are you doing? And if you wouldn't mind turning your camera on for me so we can spotlight you on the screen, everyone can see your wonderful face as part of our conversation today. And while he does that, gets his camera on and we get him onto screen, I'd like to launch a quick poll for everybody. Gordon, I think this poll is a good one to just get a temperature test of the audience and find out where everybody finds themselves today in this conversation. So if you guys see on screen, it says, what are the three most important factors ensuring transparency in the media planning and procurement process? Is it training and skills development? Is it corporate integrity? Is it personal accountability, audience verifiability, or procurement due process? Which one of those is it? I'd love to kind of get a sense of where you guys are in that conversation. All right, I see some good votes coming through. There are about 130 of you on the call today, and I'm seeing 30% votes, 35 now. We're sitting at 37%, 40. When we get to critical mass, Gordon, at about like 55, 60%, I think we can close the votes there. So we're sitting at 50%. Results are looking to me, you guys can't see them just yet, but the results to me are looking very interesting. We're at 60%. Let's do it. I'm going to end the poll here and share those results with you. The two biggest contenders for what are the three most important factors ensuring transparency seems to be corporate integrity. Interesting. And audience verifiability as the two biggest. Second to those are training and skills development and procurement due process. But this was a trick question, wasn't it, Gordon?
Yeah, a kind of trick question, but I'm pleased to see that there's a range of responses. We can't lump it all in one compartment. Training and skills development for me is very reassuring. I come from a training background with the Media Association of SA, but without corporate integrity and procurement process, what is it that you're going to train? We need to train people to fit into these things. So I'm relieved that to see corporate integrity as the starting point, because without integrity, what would be the point of me training somebody on integrity if they're not going to be rewarded for that integrity? We'll talk about that a little bit later on one or two key slides, and I'm going to give you a really good example of what happens when corporate integrity collapses, because I then am not going to take personal accountability for lack of corporate integrity.
Yeah, exactly. And that's also like a very individual thing, but it seems to be something that audiences are demanding. They want more access to it. And I'm very excited for you to unpack a bit of the past. And I don't mean the past in terms of things that are now forgotten. So much has remained indeed the same, but just maybe in different media. So Gordon, teach us a bit more about what the past can teach us about transparency as we move into the present and future.
So, yeah, indeed. Thank you. Once again, thanks for the opportunity for somebody with a background in legacy media. It's a very pleasant surprise for me to be invited to a forum like this. I'm not surprised that I've been asked to play the role of the ghost of media past, but I am surprised at the perception in the way the questions were structured there, that there was a perception that there was a black box era in the past when media decisions were taken behind closed doors and agency-client relationships functioned without disclosure requirements. There's never been a black box era. And if you read my textbook, Media Planning, Art of Science, it's explicit that all media decisions must be motivated, so much so that it's not enough to motivate inclusion into a media mix, but you must motivate the exclusions as well. If anything, to be honest, I would consider the area in which we currently operate as the black box era. So, you're not.
Perfect, Gordon. Yeah, thank you so much.
Okay, there we go. Right. Okay, just a little bit of a delay on the time slot. So that's not to say that everything in the past was transparent. I mean, there were clear indications where it wasn't transparent, and you might recall, many of you, with the exception of Chris Botha, who was only born in 1977, Muldergate and the Department of Info scandal, which brought down the Forster government. That was more than just an historical event. It had massive implication for advertisers. Okay, back then newspapers were the dominant media life form, and an ABC certificate and audited circulation was the primary currency for pricing and trading. And we had a saying there, which was absolutely applied in all practice: no ABC certificate, no business. Media owners had to subject themselves to scrutiny, and we had to, in turn, subject ourselves to scrutiny to show that we were not being favorable. This didn't require an extra clause or a contract, and I think that's perhaps the difference. This was just the way we did business. I didn't need a separate clause on a contract to understand these things. Now, here's an example, though. I mean, that's not to say that everything was totally groovy. And yes, I'm allowed to use expressions like groovy from the 60s, okay? So when it was discovered, for instance, at the Citizen, that Louis Late had bought more than 1 million copies of the Citizen newspaper, which he owned at the time, and was bulldozing these copies into mine dumps and burying them on his farm, okay? Advertisers were duly compensated for the fraud. It was fraud. So it was a political event, but it was fraud. And we knew that, and we were able to hold people to accountability. Massive amounts of money were refunded to advertisers. So I'm now going to ask you, who's compensating advertisers for ad fraud in 2025? What's the difference between burying millions of copies of the newspapers in a mine dump and a click farm? the issue is not one of the past, it is one of the past and of the present. Advertisers, are really, if you look back at some of the highlights from the, I'm just going to move this thing slightly across here. If we look at some of the highlights from the World Federation of Advertising Media Charter, which I covered in my media book. I'm going to just go through a couple of key points. These are key points which are pillars of the Media Association SA's training program. Back then we had GAMP, not GARP, generally accepted media practice, okay? Clients and agencies didn't require a separate disclosure because they were based on mutual respect. We understood what we needed to do, and we understood what clients needed to do, and we basically were there as partners in a communication business, not as regulated procurement price suppliers. And I think that's the big difference. Within that business relationship, agencies were fairly compensated, and we were compensated well. We got well paid for our trouble. What we did have was a set of severe rules that governed the relationship between agencies and media owners through the MCC. And within this framework, ad agencies received a set commission of 16.5%. Now, the income was fixed. So as a result of that, on the same transaction, if we all made the same amount of money, we were able to compete on the basis of the quality of our work rather than the price we were charging for it. Was the model sustainable? No, it wasn't. In fact, 2018, the Competitions Commission ruled that this constituted collusion, but that's a deep story for another day. So there was a background where agencies and clients were in a relationship. Now we have a scenario where in recent years we've seen media fragmentation, massive fragmentation in agencies. What used to be a one-stop shop is now a multiple stop shop, 6, 7 suppliers, digital media taking 40% of the pie locally, and Metro and Alphabet taking most of that offshore. Advertising budgets have not increased. So at the end of the day, is it possible for us, are we being fairly compensated? Are we partners in business now, or are we being beaten to a pulp just to supply stuff at a reasonable price? So financial transparency is critical to the whole thing. We understand that. It's not just behavioral transparency, it's financial transparency. And when you can't make a living, then you have to make a plan. And so enter principal trading. Now, I know this is not a feature of life back in the early days. Now, I'm the ghost of media past. I'm not here to talk about the present, but I've got to say, principal trading is a black box. Principal trading is something which is prevalent only in the present era. And as an advertiser, and if there are advertisers on this group, if you don't have sight of the media contract between your media buying supplier and the media owner, then you truly don't know what you are paying. The black box era is not the past. The black box era is now. Financial transparency. I mean, let me give you an example of this. I mean, there's not always a right and wrong in this kind of thing. And I've often said, if you, I know if you want to be a Boolean media ninja, then that's fine. Get a light switch. It's not always right and wrong. But, to just justify everything through discounting is really not something which is which we can sustain. So let's take the New Age as an example. New Age, and I hope the Guptas try and sue me, because that'll be really a lot of fun. I'm looking forward to that. But at the end of the day, they claimed 100,000 circulation. Okay, let's say 100,000 circulation is 100,000 rand. 10% I earn 10,000 rand. Now I just happen to be, because I'm old and grumpy, the kind of guy who phoned the printer and said, "Listen, between us girls, what are you printing?" "We're printing 10,000. "Okay, we're printing 10,000. 10,000 at 10% is 1,000 rand. So where's my corporate integrity or my personal integrity? I can make 10,000 rand for the company or 1,000 rand on the same business transaction. Take it one step further, because what was happening was they were offering 25% commission. Okay, so I, as a planner, I'm set faced. I can deliver 1,000 rand through behaving with integrity, or 25,000 rand through no integrity. It would never have happened if we'd applied the simple rule: no ABC, no business. So if you want to be a Boolean logic media ninja, get yourself a light switch. We understand there's more to it than discounting. Okay. I understand that media buying is not always about right or wrong, but we've got to find some way of balancing the books. Okay, ad fraud is not about the size of the audience; it's about why the thing was put on there in the first place. So, what we are discovering more and more is that media can and should be motivated onto the schedule on the basis of contextual relevance. Even Ehrenberg Bass is changing the tune in this one. It's no longer about massive reach. It's about contextual reach. Okay. The UCT Liberty Institute of Strategic Marketing textbook to marketing to SA consumers has had 250,000 downloads globally. It's a global success. In my media chapter, you can read about the importance of contextual reach. Or you could just go back to my book from 1996 and read about it there. It's the same thing. So final wrap up as I'm tight on time. Where do we go next? I think what we just need to do is get together in industry. I'm sure the AMF's got a charter. I know the IAB's got one. All of us have different charters, but none of us are sharing those charters in the same space. So if we go to the best example of global best practice, Loi Sapin, the law in France, which is now Sapin 2, they list 8 key points which are transparency and integrity, anti-corruption, etc. We need to get together. We need to share all this, pool all of it in one place, and come away with a transparency charter which cuts across all the disciplines. And you will recognize from those 8 pillars of Sapin to my questions that were posed up front. So that's the end of my little dip into this space. A very brief one, and I hope I've made some clarity. But yeah, no black box error in the past, that's for sure.
Yeah, no, definitely. I really find this super fascinating and insightful. Thank you, Gordon. I mean, there's obviously a lot of learning that we can all take from what you've shared now from the past. And I find it so interesting in the media landscape is there's always this narrative that as soon as digital arrived, like marketing went out the window or all of these metrics went out the window. But where in fact, a lot of it has actually remained the same. There's a lot that still applies that we still need to try and figure out how we can track and measure and think about sort of, transparency and ethics in the way that we deliver against audiences, especially because of the demand is coming so much stronger now in the digital age, and our access to media has grown. So Gordon, really, really insightful. Thank you very, very much today.
Thank you.
He's not going anywhere, though. He's going to be in our Q&A towards the end, and I'm sure lots of you will have many questions. I saw some good comments in the chat. Thank you to all of those who had shared some. It's really wonderful to see the kinds of sort of notes that you have, the reactions of giggles when he mentioned the different eras and the way that things operate, lots of claps for some of the insights that he was sharing as well, too. So keep those coming. And if you have any questions in the Q&A, please do pop those, type them out, and we'll get those answered for you during the Q&A section towards the end. So take a moment now to do that while I introduce our next speaker, Troy Griffin. He's going to be speaking to us about the present, the push for disclosure. He's the marketing lead at Core Group and one of the brightest creative thinkers in modern marketing, if I do say so myself. Troy believes that the great advertising starts really with honesty and a solid cup of coffee. That's all one needs to do the best kind of marketing we can do. He's passionate about storytelling, but that connects people, not just collects impressions. And he's on a mission to keep the word authenticity meaningful in our industry. We often throw it around as a bit of a sort of rote word in our work, but I think authenticity needs to regain some kind of meaning. And hopefully today he will share some thoughts about transparency and what it looks like in real time and how it's reshaping how brands and agencies collaborate today. Always a bit of an interesting collaboration between agencies and brands. And I'm excited to hear what your thoughts are there, Troy. And as he begins, you'll also see a poll pop up. So please do weigh in on the poll when he does launch it later on in his presentation. Troy, welcome. Good morning. How are you?
Good morning. Thank you so much, Danilo. I really appreciate it. Thanks for teeing that up. And just a huge shout out to Gordon. I think a wealth of knowledge from his time in the media industry. I've taken my learnings from it. But yeah,
the real question is whether your authentic marketing has led him to buy a new iPhone 17. But I'm not too sure. Time will tell.
Well, he'll have to answer that question for you.
Off you go, Troy.
Thanks, man. So as Danilo says, hi, everybody. I'm Troy Griffin. I'm Senior Marketing Manager at the Core Group. And ultimately, we are Apple's authorized distributor across Africa. In addition to that, I also look after the iStore brand in the SADC markets as well as Nigeria. And ultimately, this means that my world sits right at the crosshairs between, global brand expectations as well as local market realities. And honestly, that's where transparency for me either makes or breaks how we operate. And I say that because when you're managing marketing across multiple countries, multiple partners, multiple currencies, you start to realize that transparency isn't just a nice to have, it's actually your tool for survival. So when the IAB invited me to talk about the present and brands demanding answers, I thought it's the perfect opportunity because, you know, that relationship between brand as well as agency is becoming more and more important to be an open and honest commitment to each other. So for many years, we based our media plans off of the infamous 360-degree campaign, where a little bit or a lot of media was spread across the various channels. A lot of TV with a bit of radio and some out of home. Yes, out of home because, you know, out of home is saying we are a big brand. And that was what it took for young brand managers to look like rock stars in front of their senior stakeholders and ultimately hit their KPIs to forge ahead in their careers. Budgets went in, reports came out, and somewhere in between all of that, magic happened. But that era is now gone, and today brands are expected to justify every single decision, not just the spend, but the reasoning behind it. And that's where transparency becomes critical, not more as a buzzword, but literally the bridge between marketing, media, and the money. And I think when you're sitting on the brand side, the money is probably the biggest conversation in the boardroom. The questions around why we're running paid ads on Facebook when our target market is 18 to 25 years old starts to enter the chat. You know, why are we wasting money on a medium that our audience believes is similar to a high school yearbook from the 80s? And ultimately, if we're being honest with ourselves, we've all found ourselves in a boardroom where, you know, the CFO or the finance person is asking us some serious questions. So you've got the CMO on one side, you've got your marketing person on one side, you've got finance on the other, and we're sitting there with a campaign report that's full of impressions, reach, and CPMs. It all boils down to the finance person saying, but why are we spending our money on these channels? Why have you opted for this? I'm not seeing the ROI. We are not getting conversions in store. And that's the moment that you realize that it's really difficult to defend what you don't fully understand. And so that's why transparency matters. It's because it gives marketeers confidence and confidence to stand in front of leadership and say, here's why this works, here's why it didn't, and this is what we're going to do differently next time. I think it's also important for agency partners to know and understand the internal canvassing that takes place in the boardrooms. We're often competing with a sales team who are keen to put budget into dropping price. And we as marketing never want to do that. We want to build brands so that authentic, organic conversion takes place. And the more we are equipped with the data and the tools to pitch internally, the more likely we are to get the business approvals and to reinvest in future campaigns. If we are empowered with explaining programmatic and its results in simple logic that shows business value, we've won half the battle because finance are sitting there and saying, what is this hocus pocus magic that you guys are trying to pull? Ultimately, we're looking for a media plan that really answers to why is it that we are choosing this channel? Why is it that we are going after this platform? And why are we choosing this particular audience? Just to kind of give you a bit of a caveat, you know, real life example in Botswana, which is the land of billboards. I've had a media agency once recommend digital out of home to me, which was more cost effective and provides mass awareness. And time and time again, they would, you know, recommend some of these sites at these intersections for campaign launches as well as new product launches. Only for a colleague to head into the market, doing a market visit, and literally give me a call and advise that the digital out of home site had so many brands and ads running on it that they had to park their car off at the intersection for between 5 to 10 minutes before our ad then loops on the rotation. So ultimately what I'm getting at here is that if you have the partnership with your media agency, you know, it's a simple conversation to say, cool, you'll get mass awareness here, but the frequency of it may not land as well as if we were to go with, you know, a fully invested YouTube campaign. The challenge, though, is that even in 2025, there's still a gap between what brands need to know and what they're actually being told by their agency. So sometimes you get reports that are full of data but lack the context. Other times we're told the algorithm decided or our model optimized for efficiency, and sitting on the brand side, we don't always know what that means. So we're not asking you for trade secrets. All we're asking for is the clarity. What was the logic behind the decisions? What audiences were prioritized? What did we learn that will make us better next quarter? That's the kind of transparency that builds trust. Danilo mentioned that we're looking at doing a poll, so I think let's take a moment now. Let's draw up the poll. I'd love to know a little bit more from the audience. Ultimately, what's your biggest transparency frustration right now? Is it not knowing how media budgets are allocated? Is it a lack of visibility into audience targeting? Could it be limited post-campaign learnings or overly complex or vague reporting? I know we'll give it a couple of seconds so that everybody can participate, but I'm keen to see what comes out.
Results coming in lekker fast. We're sitting about 45% of people have voted. You've got about 100 votes in so far. Let's get it to about 60, then we can reveal those results to you. You're sitting at about 55%. Just received about 60% now, if you'd like to review those results.
Yep, let's do it. So not really surprising that overly complex or vague reporting comes out as the winner. And I think that speaks to a little bit about what I had mentioned earlier on. You know, it's the impressions, it's the click-through rates, it's the CPMs. But ultimately, you know, what does all of that mean? And how do we then take that into the boardroom with our peers, with our stakeholders, and explain to them how effective campaigns have been? If we can have an open line of communication and information across all of the departments, finance, marketing, agency, and then platform, it will ultimately result in more investment. And I think the key to this is commitment. And the commitment is between the agency and the brand. The commitment to walking this journey together and holding each other accountable through the wins and the learnings. On campaigns that don't go according to plan, which happens a lot, it's okay to unpack it and to move forward with the knowledge that the creative didn't quite land, or that doom scrolling meant that your placements was just wallpaper. The commitment needs to be between brand, agency, and a commitment to success and not a PO or an invoice. Cool. So for brands, transparency challenges often show up in 3 ways. First, it's when there's limited visibility and it's hard to defend budgets. Secondly, it's when you know, we're limited from an agility perspective because you can't adjust what you can't see, and that's why it's so important that during campaigns you're meeting frequently with your agency, that you're getting an update. You know, if there's A/B testing, you know, what are we pivoting towards in terms of the creative that's performed best? It's really important to have that constant line of communication open. And third, it impacts trust. So between the brand, the agency, and then ultimately leadership, which in effect means less budget to put towards some of these platforms. So the issue isn't just data, it's confidence. And confidence is currency. When we understand how and why decisions are made, we're more willing to invest again. An interesting stat is that over half of marketing professionals globally say that their confidence in measurement hasn't improved in the last year. And some say it's actually declined despite more data than ever. So it's not that we lack data, it's that we lack clarity. The irony of the digital era is that we're drowning in dashboards, but still thirsty for insight. And the recent creative from Vaseline that's done so well is from an insight that we've all seen and known all along. It wasn't buried in a dashboard with tons of metrics. It was a human observation that connected with a human emotion that's so nostalgic for all of us. We don't need more numbers, we need better narratives. So what does good enough transparency look like from a brand perspective? For me, it's 5 simple things. It's clarity on decision logic, not just what we bought, but why we're buying that platform or media. It's access to performance data, but in real language, not just metrics. Thirdly, it's benchmark comparisons. Let's look at what has worked really well globally as well as locally, and let's understand how we measure up against some of those campaigns. Fourth, it's post-campaign learnings. So what did we test? What did we learn? And what's next? And last but not least, it's shared accountability, because transparency is a partnership, not a pass or fail test. So for me, that's what good looks like today. Not perfection, just openness. I see Danilo has popped up on my screen, so I don't know if that's a signal to say I'm running out of time. But ultimately, brands and agencies, platforms as well, they all want growth. But growth only happens when we trust the process. And trusting the process only happens when we understand it. So as brands, let's keep asking the right questions, not to challenge, but to connect, because the future of media belongs to those who can explain their why. And that's just a little bit from my side for today. I know we're heading into the the future, but Danilo will take it away from here.
Well, you've already started talking about the future, Troy, so maybe you should take the third session as well. It'd be really cool to get your thoughts as to where the future is heading as well. There's a question in the chat for you that it's not a Q&A question, but I thought it would be quite cool for you to recover for us. But Christopher Else is asking you to repeat those 5, please, or maybe to type them into the chat for us if you could. Those 5 key takeouts.
I'll pop them. Definitely pop them into the chat.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. And there was another message in from Andrea Mitchell, who says a crucial consideration for all agencies: ensure objectives are clearly understood. Let those objectives drive all decisions and report on that objective as a primary. Doesn't matter how many impressions, clicks, or engagements there were if the objective is ROAS. And I think that's not only a note to agency, it's also a note to brand, who often are very unclear as to what success looks like or what to measure or what the KPI is for campaigns as well. So it's a message to the industry rather than just to the one or the other. But Troy, thank you. Super insightful. And thanks for sharing that at least you were doing a lot of this really hard work in the businesses that you have influence over. And we look forward to the Q&A later on. I see some questions popping through right now. And so if you guys do have any questions for Troy, please do pop them through in the Q&A box right at the bottom of your screen. We move now to our third and final speaker before the Q&A, Chris Botha. I'm so excited to have him here today. So Chris is going to be focusing on the future, where transparency fuels strategic planning. And to close out this discussion, he is going to be speaking as the Group Managing Director of Park Advertising, the parent company of The Media Shop and Meta Media. Chris started his career behind a campus radio mic in Bloemfontein and now leads one of South Africa's largest media groups. He's known for his alternative thinking and big picture vision, earning titles like Media Innovator of the Year and Media Shepherd at the Most Awards. Chris will share how transparency can unlock better strategy, stronger client trust, and more courageous decision-making in the year ahead. And yes, there's a last poll coming through towards his session as well too, so stay tuned for that. Chris, rub your magic ball. What does the future hold?
Sure. Dan, I think if I could definitively say what the future would hold, I would be a very, very rich man. But I'm going to go ahead and take a few guesses at it, and tell you where I think we'll land. But yeah, let's see what we can do from here. Right. Good morning, everybody, and it's wonderful to be with all of you on the call. Like Dan said, my name is Chris Botha, and it's wonderful to be with you today. So let me add a few caveats before I jump into my presentation. First of all, I hate to burst your bubble. I'm not going to give you a definitive answer of what I think the future of transparency will look like. What I will, however, speak on is what I think the future of the agency model will look like. And by the way, I've loved the comments and the questions so far. I've looked at a number of them, and I think they're spot on in terms of the agency model that impacts transparency in such an important way. And then I'm going to ask you a question before I go into the future of transparency. I'm going to ask you this question. What is transparency? I think it's such an important question for us to answer as we jump into the presentation and look at it in a little bit more detail. So here's my thought on what I think the future of transparency will look like. I think the single biggest thing that will influence transparency into the future will be the amount of role players with ownership involved will determine the level of transparency we will have. I'm going to read that again, and then I'm going to explain my thought to you. The amount of role players with ownership involved will determine the level of transparency we will have in the future. Let me quantify it to you. Let me explain it in a little bit more detail. So many years ago, if you'd go to the market and you wanted to go buy some carrots, you'd go to the market and say, okay, well, I want to buy some carrots. You go to the farmer. Now, this isn't Gordon Miller's days where there was no such thing as Pick n Pay or ShopRite. You'd go to the market, you put down your money, and you'd get some carrots, right? But if you were to go buy carrots or baked beans today, what would that look like? Okay, so for most of us, the market has become far more complex, and there's far more role players, each with their own ownership and expectation as they all enter the fray. So what does it look like at the moment? So this is a can of Koo-baked beans. So it's 400 grams of Koo-baked beans, right? Now, if I said to you, transparency is seeing a price tag on the Koo-baked beans that says 400 grams of Koo-baked beans for 16.99 Rand is transparency. Okay, that's your definition of what you would consider transparency to be, right? But what does the farmer make, right? The farmer surely takes a cut out of the Koo-baked beans, right? Then he sells it, by the way, to the wholesaler and the corporation, and they need to make some money along the way as well. The wholesaler and the corporation then sell it to Tiger Brands, and they have to make some money along the way as well. And then the ShopRite, who we're buying the 400 grams of Koo-baked beans for 16.99 Rand from, and they have to make some money. And then there's the customer that pays the 16.99 Rand. So what does transparency mean to you? Is transparency understanding that I pay 16.99 Rand with ShopRite, or is transparency understanding the full funnel and how much everybody makes along the way? Because that is where ownership then starts becoming more complicated, and transparency becomes a little bit more of a complicated discussion. So that's why I think for me, as a starting point, one of the early definitions we need to get right is, what does transparency mean to you? If you want to know, when I pay 16.99 Rand for Koo-baked beans at ShopRite, I want to know how much is Tiger making, how much is the wholesaler making, how much is the farmer making, so that I can then determine whether 16.99 is the right price to pay. Then you're not going to get very far. So let's move on in terms of, what does baked beans and carrots have to do with advertising? So I'm going to be a little bit naughty, and I'm going to go a little bit into the past as well, and a little bit in the present, but it will determine what the future looks like, in my opinion. So if you go look at the then, and when I say then, the past, I'm talking about advertising 10 years ago, maybe. Who owned what, and what did the model look like? So first of all, from a technology perspective, technology has changed a lot, and there was technology being built at the time that it was basically cross-platform technology with complex APIs that needed to be built in order that we could access DV360, we could access Meta, we could access basically the entire open web in order to promote our clients' brand technologically, right? That technology, I mean, we're part of the IPG group. It used to be called Cadrian. It's called Kinesso now. Omnicom had their own one called Acuin. Publicis had Vivaki. WPP had Xaxis. All of this technology had to be built by all of these tech holding companies, right? By the ad holding companies. Then there was data, right? Purchasing third-party data to improve your performance and enhance your targeting. That was something that had to be paid for. So very famously, a couple of years ago, probably about 6-7 years ago, IPG bought a company called Acxiom for $2.3 billion. So that had to be paid for in order to have the data to make our campaign stronger, make our technology better, and give ourselves differentiation. Then there were platform deals, negotiating agency-specific deals, PMP deals for our clients. All of these things had to be negotiated, and you needed somebody to do it. And then, of course, specialists, the specialists that actually did the work of operating a lot of the technology. And all of this had to be paid for, right? But who owned it? And that goes back to my question around, what is transparency to you and who owns it? That was, for the most part, owned by the agencies. The agencies were the one investing in the technology. The agencies were the one investing in data. The agencies were the ones setting up the data deals, and the agencies were the one having the specialists running it, right? So therefore, what's the best way for an agency to charge for it? The answer is a black box model. And black box, I think, carries a bit of a dark perception to it, but it shouldn't. The reality is, if Acxiom, where IPG paid $2.3 billion for it, if I had to go charge my clients their share of the $2.3 billion, it would be an almost impossible exercise to work out if they wanted to use it. So that's why the black box model built and became so strong, right? To where we are today, what does the model look like today? Today, there's a variety of technologies that are available, and very often they are licensed by clients or by media owners themselves. Let's use an example. DV360 is a platform that a lot of clients use nowadays. Clients have a direct license, agencies have a direct license, the Trade Desk, Adobe Ad Cloud, whatever your platform technology is that you are using, this is the sort of technology. But the carrying of that cost of the technology is very often carried by the client, which means that they have a little bit more transparency. From a data perspective, whether they have Salesforce or whether they have Adobe or any of the other data platforms installed, again, first-party data for the most part owned by the client. So now you have the technology owned by the client and the data owned by the client. The platform deals are still done very often by the agencies, and the specialists are still very much by the agency. So what does that mean? Have we moved away from a black box? Well, to an extent. And again, I want to just state this, and it might be a controversial opinion, but I think if you think DV360 is transparent, I think you are, that is going back to the ShopRite invoice again. You are getting a Koo Baked Bean invoice for $16.99. You don't know what's back behind that. So nowadays we have clients who have ownership of their own technology, sort of, kind of, and they have access to their own data, sort of, kind of, right? Which means that they have more transparency than what they've ever had in the past, sort of, kind of, right? Everybody's still with me. So therefore we have a commercial model that is more transparent today, sort of, kind of. What does the future look like? Now, the future, I think, for me, is fascinating. I think with the development of AI and technology, I think we are going to have this is just my prediction, by the way. Feel free to disagree from me. I think we're going to basically have more autonomous media systems where technology and data will be AI infused. It'll be a single platform. It'll be across walled gardens. I think data will be shared like on platforms like LiveRamp, Omniscient, all of these sort of things. We're going to have these composable CDPs basically into the future. Platform deals will be far less, and I think staff will be far fewer, right? So I think we're going to have this one tool, basically, the one ring to rule it all, where we will all have access to technology and data across a variety of platforms. But it will be one tech. It'll be one tech. Now, here's the million-dollar question we have to ask ourselves, right? The commercial model will be based on who owns the technology. Who owns the technology? So I'm going to ask you on a poll just now, who do you think owns the technology? But before we start the poll, I want to just give you a few options, right? So will the technology be owned by Google or a media owner? By the way, you can jump on the poll if you want as you go along. Will the technology be owned by the agencies, right? So maybe the agencies will have the answers. By the way, for those of you who don't know, that lady over there, her name is Cindy Rose. She is from Microsoft, and she is the new CEO of WPP. So I suspect WPP's play is very much around building technology for clients. Accenture recently announced their refinery. They're investing in 2,000 AI specialists to build ad tech and the sort of AI technology that will impact our clients. Will our clients themselves own the technology? Or will it be the big tech companies like Amazon and IBM or Oracle that will own the technology and therefore will be able to determine the level of transparency? So the question is, how much transparency will we have? Well, the reality is it all depends on who owns the best tool for the job. So maybe we can see the answers to see in terms of our poll, what the answers are. Tech companies. Yeah, I think that's a very good guess. Clients, the agencies and media owners are fairly even split amongst those. But it looks like the overwhelming majority is the tech companies. And if you then believe, by the way, that the tech companies are all fully transparent, going back to my very first question around defined transparency, I think, as my daughter would say, you are delulu. But let's move on, right? What can we learn from the Koo Baked Beans example? If you want complete transparency, make sure you own it. But very few people will be able to do this. Then you are the farmer. You are the farmer who knows exactly what it costs you to make the farm. So own it if you want to have complete transparency. For everyone else, work with people who you trust. I loved what Troy said. Troy, I'm literally just shouting amen as you were going along. Work with people who you trust, who can give you a level of transparency that you want, right? That for me is exactly right. But for those of you who can't afford to do either one of those two, the more you partner, the more competition we have, the fairer the pricing will be. If you go look at competition, if you go to, you know how you know $16.99 is a good price for Koo Baked Beans? Because ShopRite sells it at $16.99, Pick n Pay at $17.99, Woolworths at $18.99, ShopRite for the win, always at the best prices and the best advice. So let's make sure that we prevent monopolies, duopolies, and exclusive ownership of what determines pricing. Remember, transparency thrives in competition. And that is it from my side. Thank you very much.
Chris, we're loving this. I mean, your daughter says Delulu, but because of the amount of times you've advertised Koo Beans, I'm just wondering whether you just cuckoo, because Koo Beans. But anyway,
fair enough.
That's us later on. Thank you very, very much. Some great insights there. And I'm going to invite all of our 3 speakers onto screen because it's already 1:45 and we want to be wrapped up here by sort of 12 o'clock so that everybody can have a sharp next meeting. I'm sure the digital age has just moved from digital calls to digital calls. And so thanks so much to those who have popped their questions into the Q&A. Really, really insightful. And to those who have asked in the chat, yes, the recording will be made available, but it will take a little bit of some time to get it sort of edited out so that we can remove all of Chris's blaspheming and all of Gordon's comments from the past before we move into getting those published. I'll start with the question from Oresti Patricios, who's obviously a good friend here of the IAB. He's asking, and I suppose it's to the entire panel, anybody who feels comfortable to answer can go ahead. The question is, as budgets shift to digital, why haven't advertisers used their spend to demand IAB-aligned transparency, given bot inflation and opaque metrics, especially in social media? How can we ensure more digital transparency and keep these platforms accountable? Chris, maybe you want to start with that one, or Gordon?
Sure.
Okay.
I think happy to jump on. I think for me, the transparency, like I said earlier on, transparency and ownership for me are the two that go hand in hand. But I think what we have seen is the third element that I spoke about, my last point, was around competition. How do you know that you are that you get transparency? Is by competition, is by having other platforms. If you run a CPA campaign on Google, on Facebook, on TikTok, on YouTube, literally you can measure it by the amount of sales that you get, right? So I think as we have transparency, I think transparency will be driven by more competition and being able to compare one to the other. I think the days of you had this magic black box campaign and something went in and something came out, I think cost per, like the impression views, I think those sort of things, I think that's the danger. I think for me, it is more in terms of using digital for what we truly know it is for, is actual responses.
Cool. Yeah, Gordon, something to add to that?
Yeah, I think part of the issue here is, and on my poll, sort of training was skills development and training was one of the points which cropped up. It would be interesting, is there anybody on this meeting, just put a thumbs up there, who's actually somebody who works in procurement specifically? I'd be surprised if there's one. At a recent AMASA function, we had a room full of 300 people, and I posed that question, one procurement person. So, whatever the complexities of the argument are, unless we engage with procurement, we're not going to make any progress. And there I would cite World Federation of Advertisers' white paper called Project Spring. They did a study about 5 years ago, global marketers, global procurement. They are universally aligned on the fact that they have to coexist, and they are equally universally aligned on the fact that they don't speak the same language. They have to speak the same language. We've got to, sort of facilitate that exchange. Once we speak the same language, then I think we can address these issues of accountability. That's critical. And if you look at that Project Spring, it moves into the space that Chris was talking about, responses. There is, and I'm quoting him, paraphrasing, maybe almost quoting, but there's the narrative says we need to shift away from the cost of the buy to the value that the buy contributes. That's the game we're in now. Whether Chris does it by pricing correctly and getting more exposure, or I play a game in my head on trust and strategic insight, at the end of the day, we can compete on what we sell, but we must compete against the same objective, which is moving it to the value that the buy actually contributes.
Very good.
But that is also a bit of an opaque sort of ideology of like what we want to measure. I mean, sales is easy. It's the thing that everyone's defaulted to, is trying to determine sort of like, I spend X amount in advertising, I get X amount in sales, your ROAS. But like, for example, like brand marketing, being able to find metrics or measurement tools or things to understand like how much value in brand uplift or how much recall do I believe is enough for my investment? These things become quite interesting to navigate, but ones that should be happening in conversation. Yes, Gordon.
So if you look at Walk's paper in combination with Google on the messy middle, what they are saying is that balancing that full funnel approach will give you a median 90% uplift, not an average, a median 90% average uplift in brand performance against whatever the metrics were that the study indicated. And if you apply too much in the bottom end, there's a potential minus 43% in terms of erosion. But the best example of all of this for me, if you go to the Google paper, which predicted, well, which coined the phrase messy middle. In 2016, something happened, or 2012 rather, something happened in the UK, which I think was amazing, that for the very first time ever on search went from what is the cheapest, and you'll see that it's like an X, you'll see the point of inflection, and it became what is the best. And you will see that X just continues to do this. And the gap between searching for what is the best and what is the cheapest, I would suggest, is brand value and margin.
Love it. I mean, if you wouldn't mind, if you can find the paper, or if there is a link or URL to it, just post it in the chat, or perhaps we can send it to our attendees after the webinar. It would be really helpful, Gordon. Sounds like a valuable piece of learning. Another question came in from Stephen, which I find also really fascinating, and let's answer this one together. It's to you, Chris, directly, but those, Troy, Gordon, please answer if you guys have any other thoughts to add. It says to Chris, are we moving to some feudalistic system where we own the crop, the platforms, but the landlords are the tech companies? And I suppose in addition to Chris's, Stephen's question would be sort of like, what role does the IAB and regulatory bodies play in trying to facilitate this kind of transparent work that we're trying to do here?
That's an excellent question. I think it's 100% right. So let's use an example like Amazon. If Amazon now go and build this technology that is going to be across a variety of platforms, right? And we then license Amazon. Amazon is a $2.4 trillion company. Do you think that they do this for the pleasure of their company, right? I think then we will have less and less transparency. So therefore, I think going back to earlier on, I think it is across all of us is how do we have a variety of platforms that we can pick from, where you have a level of transparency that you can work with. And I think, so for me, I think, again, going back to I don't want to sound like a broken record, but I think for me, competition is incredibly important, that we can counterpoint. Because if you put all your eggs into one basket, you don't know what you are getting. And I think that is where, if the likes of an Amazon is the single holder of that technology. And by the way, let's call it out, the likes of a Google, if they become the de facto answer for all things programmatic, and you think that you're getting a transparent answer, you are not.
Isn't that where regulatory bodies fit in? I mean, that's what I'd imagine 100%. Is where regulation and sort of like, but then it requires mass buy-in. It's almost the same model of the UN and international peace. There's still wars going on. There's still a lot of competition for markets, but the things like the UN are required to, regulate those kind of environments. Is it not the same 100%. On an advertising level?
And I think spot on. And I think what makes it harder is that you're trying to regulate a company in California from Johannesburg, South Africa. Right, and I think that's the danger. Is I always use this example. If a client of mine's got a problem with the SABC, I know the CEO of the SABC. I can pick up the phone today and we can sort it out. It's sorted. If a client has a problem with Facebook, I'm not on first name basis with Mr. Zuckerberg, so I'm not going to be able to pick up the phone to him and really have rough it out and to try and get to a transparent answer. I think that's our challenge. Is that the layers, again, with layers of ownership, which I spoke about in my presentation, I think complicates the single ownership.
And Troy, speaking from brand side, I'd just be very interested to know, I mean, this is the frustration that all agencies find, is like there will be Meta issues, there will be Google issues, and clients want answers, but are very it almost sounds like agencies give a lot of excuses for why certain things are the way that they are. That's how the algorithm functions, or that's how the technology works. And that doesn't seem to be good enough from brand side, but any advice or thoughts from you on how we can better manage that transparency in an unregulated environment?
Yeah, I think it is quite difficult because often we'll have the issues with the likes of Meta, and you've just got to rely almost on your agency partners, like I want to call it personal relationship or access to the person on the other side. So very often, the agency will just have to follow the process in terms of logging a ticket and, waiting to get the response. Sometimes, if you're fortunate, you do have somebody on the other side that you can send a WhatsApp to and some information can come through a little bit more quickly. But I mean, an example is like in Nigeria, we had an iStore X account shut down because it was deemed, like a fake profile. So we submitted all of the content to say, no, we're legit, we're legal, we are the owners of this. But I mean, that process to unlock that account is just, takes weeks and weeks, and, you've got a launch that's happening and you want to be agile and in the space. So it does become quite difficult. And then just building on the discussion about competitors and what Chris had mentioned, with more competitors, this thing becomes a lot more fair. But I think it's just so difficult because, you know, the big companies have gotten such a lead and such a head start in the industry that to enter as the underdog, you know, you're starting off the back foot. And then also, we're not going to get the same efficiencies that the bigger companies have because they've just built up this runway of proven success. So which brand person is going to want to take a chance on the competitor and get
Correct.
less impressions or get less value for money?
But
So
in another world, what brand will be happy having only one company being the only available option? It feels like this bit of a catch-22
100%.
situation.
Yeah,
Hence why I
absolutely.
kind of really want to emphasize and kind of keen to get your thoughts, Gordon. You've obviously watched the world unfold in the space a number of times through many transitions, you know, about the role of regulation and regulatory bodies when there is high competition and capitalism, where everybody's trying to fight for their lives to keep the business or find the job or get the job. There isn't a sort of metric on being, there is no sort of success in valued relationships and transparency. It's not something that, you know, leads to higher margins, better profitability. That does regulatory bodies have a role then to play, Gordon?
So I think let's take it back to value. I mean, talking about, I see Ryan and Cornelius had questions about procurement squeeze. So part of the problem we face, I mean, advertising is not like making a spark plug for a car. It's a very intimate relationship, okay? And it will take you 2 to 3 years to actually understand a client's business with any degree of sort of depth knowledge. By which point, you know, if you're typically on a media kind of procurement cycle, you lose the business anyway. So why would I invest, you know, my integrity and everything into a relationship that's only going to last 2.5 to 3 years? And so and if I look at normal servicing, I'm not profitable in year 1 or 2 because I'm just throwing everything at it. So by the time we have an equitable relationship, it's all over. So I don't think bodies can regulate that. But what we need to do, again, as I say, is go back to procurement and actually explain, you know, what does it mean when WARC and the WFA talk about moving the value from the cost of the buyer to what the buyer contributes. We need to unpack how that works, and I do that as part of my normal kind of life, is to, if I'm handling an agency pitch, I will do it on one condition and one condition only, that I have one day with the procurement team. That's it. So we have to get away from the regulation to best practice. But at the end of the day, you know, we suffer in media from one particular challenge. I mean, I know how long it takes to make shoelaces for a pair of shoes. Okay, and I can tell my client, and then I'll make 1 million of those, and we'll think. But how long does it take to have a good idea? And that's the issue. Ultimately, what we in media have to understand is something which I understood from day one. It was drilled into me because I worked in a one-stop shop, a creative agency. We are children of a lesser God. That's just that simple. It is creativity that sells. And we are there to amplify the creativity. Or if you can have the creative idea yourself, that's great. But we're in the creative advertising. You know, how long does it take to write a hit song? How long does it take to win an Oscar? Creativity is magic. David Ogilvy said it all. You know, it's magic. So you can't regulate magic, is my point, unless you're in Hogwarts.
Beautiful stuff, Gordon. That's a really, really nice way to also wrap up our discussion today. And I do want to be cognizant of the time we have with our audiences today. Andrea, thank you so much for your comments, for saying very, very valuable session. Thank you so much to everybody. Susie saying thanks all. Really looking forward to the notes of these recordings as well. Garth putting some comments in. Kelvin as well too. Renee saying amen. And MJ Khan saying great insights, guys. I'm really, really appreciating this session. To our over 150 participants in the call today, thank you so much for making time. Thank you to our 3 speakers. So another round of applause if you wouldn't mind using all of your reactions. Chris Buerter, Group MD of Park Advertising, Troy Griffin, Marketing Lead at the Core Group, and Gordon Muller, Head Coach at The Media Coach. I really, really appreciate all of their time today, sharing some of their tightened insights for us today as part of the Insight series. And hopefully this does give you a bit of a competitive advantage, something to think about as you end into 2023. And so from Gordon's stories of the black box days to Troy's call for honesty and authenticity, and now to Chris's vision of a transparent, strategy-led future, one thing is clear: transparency isn't just a buzzword. It really is the advantage that we get to have as brand and marketers in this industry. So big thank you to everybody who joined us. We do have another Insight series coming at the end of November. It's not on the 27th, I think, as previously advertised. It's going to be on the 20th of November. That's just to prepare everybody for all the craziness of, I'm sure, Black Friday. And so look forward to seeing you guys there. And if you'd like to re-watch the session or share it with your teams, the recording will be made available soon and shared with those who are on the IAB mailing list. If you're not on it yet, you do need to sign up to the mailing list, obviously, for transparency and privacy reasons. Go to iabsa.net and click the newsletter sign up button to join. It's absolutely free, costs you nothing, just an opportunity to stay in touch with all of the communication that we have here. And I'd like to thank everybody, including our partners, Ornico and Special Effects Media, for bringing this to life. Obviously, it wouldn't be possible without them. And we look forward to seeing you guys on the 20th of November. It's going to be a brilliant end to the 2025 series. And until next time, stay curious, stay transparent, and keep building more open and accountable media industries with us here as the IAB. My name is Danilo, and have a wonderful rest of the morning and afternoon. Ciao, ciao.